Hello, welcome to History in Lowell. I'm Maritza Grooms, joined by my buddy and personal professor, Bob Forrant. And today we have a special guest, Emily Donovan. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to chat with you both.
Yes, I know, it's been like years since I've seen you.
Yeah, I think it was like 4 years ago when we started this exhibit development process. I came here, we chatted about what we thought we might do.
Yes.
We've done it.
Ooh, let's dig into the good stuff.
Yeah.
So what are you here to talk about today?
So I'm here to talk about One City, Many Cultures, which is a new permanent exhibition that's going to be opening at the Mogan Cultural Center at Lowell National Historical Park this fall, this September, finally.
Wow.
After, at that point, 5 years. 5 years of work with community members, 5 years of work of public meetings, 5 years of research and finding photographs and designing a new permanent exhibit.
Yeah, I remember being a part of those first meetings 5 years ago. 5 years? Wow,
Yeah.
wow. So let's go back in time. Why One City, Many Cultures?
So at the Mogan Cultural Center, there are kind of two pieces of an exhibit that used to exist. One still exists into an 1840s boarding house, which talks about our mill girl story. And then there was an immigration exhibit that was developed in 1988, and it was very community driven for its time. They solicited objects and stories from the community, but it ended in 1988. And we know Lowell's immigration history, but also just cultural story has developed so much since that point in time. And so the park, typically Park Service exhibits they have about a 30-year lifespan. So once it hit that kind of 30-year mark, we were able to apply for some money, and we wanted to develop something that was not just focused on this immigrant group, this. We wanted to do something more holistic. And we didn't know what that holistic looked like. We knew that we needed to go into the community and find out. And so that was the idea of that it wasn't going to be just the immigration exhibit. It was going to be one city, many cultures, many stories in 1,300 square feet. So
What
a little ambitious.
Yeah.
Just a little ambitious. So.
A big challenge, and also so much, I think, reflecting in a way on how history has changed, how people tell immigration-related stories. Also, I think how much it's a tricky topic because it's so loaded politically in the current environment that we're in. So how to create an exhibit for a broad spectrum of people that are going to come in, right? Which is an incredible challenge, because you can have little kids coming in, second and third graders, and you can have, great grandmothers and great grandfathers coming in. And so how do you create something that's got a bit for everybody is really it's a challenge that I'm glad I wasn't in charge of.
It was a challenge from that age perspective. We also, we have, I think Lowell National Historical Park in particular really does want to focus on our local community as not just visitors, but co-creators in this. But then we also have our national audience that are coming in.
Right.
I was just working with visitors from Tennessee and South Carolina. So how do we also make it accessible for them? They're not from a city in the Northeast, but we want to make sure that there's hooks in there so that they can understand and start to build on their own past experiences, their own knowledge, but then find something new and find those stories here in Lowell.
Wow.
So it's really fun. It's a challenge, but it's really fun.
I'm blown away by the amount of work that has gone into this project, and I don't even know how you capture all of that from the 80s up till now, because we know there have been so many different cultural groups that have settled here or had to relocate here for whatever reasons. What are some of the stories that are being told? Yeah.
So I think to get at that idea of there are so many different groups and so many different people, we knew we couldn't approach it from that kind of chronological perspective.
Right.
And we also really couldn't approach it as here's the Irish story, here is the Cambodian story, here is the free black people story. We needed to figure out how to link those thematically. And through a lot of conversations, lots of conversations with our community members, hearing what was important to community members and hearing how they thought about Lowell history and their own family stories, or how they understood their friends' family stories, we kind of came up with three big themes: mobility and transition, building community, and cultural diversities and commonalities. So then from there, when you have your kind of big themes, you can drill down and find, okay, well, where are we seeing cultural diversities and commonalities in the 1980s? Where are we seeing that in the 1880s? Where are we seeing that in 1500 in what we now call Lowell? So we were able to then pick out kind of illustrative examples. So I'll say there's a scene where we're talking about stories in the home and traditions. And because we heard a lot about people feeling like traditions need to be held on to. And so you have Pauline talking to us about how pierogies are made and how that gets passed down and how they do that for the Lowell Folk Festival. And you also have Tom Libby talking about how he's trying to pass on his traditions in the indigenous community to his daughter, and now his daughter is the spirit dancer for Glicka. So we heard a lot about traditions enduring. We also heard from other people that, I didn't want to do what my family did, right? That is not what I wanted to do. So we also have some stories about people who changed traditions for their families. So it was really important to approach it thematically, I think, was the big takeaway. But then finding those really specific, exciting stories, whether from the historic record or from people right now.
Right. I remember talking to Tom Libby and finding out about how his daughter's a spirit dancer, and I was like, wow, this is so important. People think that Indigenous people just aren't here anymore. And I think that was probably one of the first times I kind of had to check my own privilege and really take a step back and say, why am I so surprised by this? Yes. Why did I think about this?
I've had that feeling thousands of times through this process, which is amazing as a human being to be able to, and I'm so honored that I've had to check myself so many times. But in particular, I know that Tom was very keen on that, is that, yes, we want to tell the Indigenous historical story, which I think a lot of us in and around New England are familiar with, right? King Philip's War and all that, Metacom's War. But then his thing was, we are still here. We're still here. And so actually most of the stories in the exhibit are about Michaela dancing or about the community that they built through the Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association in another scene. So we tried to really do that connecting of we're still, and everybody is still here, right? They have threads of, Dave McKean with the Irish stories. He's bringing up stories from 200 years ago, but that is still a very robust community today.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't look the same, and it has all the influences, and I think that was so eye-opening to everybody that participated in the process too. I just think about how we got probably 2 years in, and all of a sudden Anthony, who he immigrated from Kenya, was talking about well, we need to have the Indigenous story here, and it's that's not your story, but now because you've been hearing these conversations, you're recognizing that there's other stories that are important to tell. And I think that was a really powerful piece of this, was the community realizing that all communities have stories, individual stories, but it collectively adds to the Lowell story, which is the part that makes me teary and cry.
Yeah.
But
I know, I was getting moved. I can feel that too.
Yep. Yeah, I feel that.
I think one of the interesting things in the process was how in the midst of everything, COVID hit.
Oh, gosh.
And the meetings that had been up until that particular point, face-to-face, meetings where everybody was sitting around a table, looking at each other and talking, now we're boxes. On a computer screen, and a tremendous amount of work was done that way, but I felt like each time that I would log on for a meeting, okay, well, if there are going to be less people or whatever, but actually there started being more people.
Yeah.
And people really stuck with the process. Again, so to me, as I was participating, it made me think, okay, people really badly want to do this, because there's something to be said for COVID, forget it, why am I doing this? And yet again, so you had to be gratified in a way, I would imagine, by the fact that so many people hung in there. You had to worry at first, but then...
We were terrified. Me and Bridget Peregrino were like, we're not going to have anybody. We're going to sit in a room, a Zoom room. It wasn't even Zoom, it was WebEx. And we're going to stare at each other. And no, but people came, and the other part of it being this longer process too is we were gratified that people came into the process, were a part of it. Some people had to step back at different periods of time, come back in. It was never a committee. And it was very intentionally set up that way, where it really was trying to be a round table. And so with that, come in, say what you can, go away for 2 months, go away for a year, 2 years, come back, or just come to the opening. Even if you were just part of those first meetings, it doesn't matter. We really wanted it to be fluid, but we were gratified that people stuck with it. Like a lot of people stuck with us. And I remember some of the first meetings, people were like, oh, it's going to take 4 years. And we were like, it's going to take 4 years. And then it took 5. But it's okay. It's okay.
I mean, that's kind of incredible, though, that it only took an extra year considering.
Considering COVID in particular. That, you know, there's a lot of challenges just with, you know, how do we work with not just the community members, but also our exhibit designers and developers. Sure. They were down in Manassas, Virginia. Our fabricators are down in Virginia, too. So technology has made that actually better. And we had more access, I think, between our exhibit designers, the park staff, and our community members, because we did shift to that online. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, our developers were coming up, you know, every few months, but this allowed us to have more access in a way.
Yeah, there was a while there where I think it was almost every month. We were looking at like a different setting inside the space.
Yes.
We're going to look at the kitchen table, or we're going to look at, you know, the park, or we're going to look at this or that, and getting feedback, and then a while later getting back sort of the redo from the feedback. And so I was always sort of excited each time you would send an email, take a look at this, see what we've done, or see how far along we've gone. But so the other thing that I feel like the now with technology, so thinking back to 1988 when that was built, it was sort of built and then built, and that's it. It's static, and there's nothing else that can be done. But it feels to me like now, because of the technological presence inside exhibit spaces these days, that, you know, as another group would come into the city, say in 5 years, 6 years, whatever, there's a way, not with great ease, but there's a way. There's less of a, we have to tear this all down and redo it. Let's figure out a way to record something, videotape something, do whatever it would be, and plug it in. Does you feel like that's...
That was very paramount. We heard that from people, and we ourselves at the park also knew that we needed this to be living and breathing. It's an exhibit about people. Let's let it breathe. So we did that in a couple ways. One with videos. So we have a story booth element where people can go in and leave their story. We have a few questions to help you think about, you know, how do you express your culture, or how did you feel when you had to adjust to a new place? So we have, you know, some scaffolding for you. But then the idea is that the park's going to watch those and be able to push it back into the exhibit after we caption it and make sure it's accessible. So that's one way. The other interesting way, it's not just with technology, but the design minds, our designers, developed this, it's called a reader rail system. And so basically, we have our panels on the wall, like your regular exhibit, but then we also have these cards, basically. And it lets us have living stories in two ways. One is we can ask questions of people, and you can take a whiteboard marker if you're visiting the exhibit, and you can write it and then put it there. And then I walk through the exhibit and I see your story. So we can have visitors just adding as we go. And then we also have the ability with all the templates to say, okay, now we knew that this new group is being settled in Lowell. And it's really critical that we want to tell their story as to why they're being settled here. You know, what is their cultural expression? How do they feel about this place? We can use that and put that photograph and write that exhibit text and have it be a panel in there too. So it's kind of two-part, right? Like visitors that are coming, but also, you know, actual panels that we're going to print and make look professional too. So living, breathing exhibit, just like our city.
That is so cool.
It's gonna be fun.
As historians, I want to know, like, how do you feel about the fact that this is how we're doing it now? This is how we're telling stories now, and it could evolve in the future. I mean, in my mind, I'm like thinking there will be holograms of people. Like maybe we can get a hologram of Bob telling Lowell history.
I think we should.
Right? How cool would that
become
be?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, how do you feel about that?
I think that the biggest thing for me is, like, with us being able to talk about history and to tell stories, it's to be inclusive, right? Like, for so long, history has been told from maybe one or limited perspectives. And I think the ways that we can have audiences, visitors, be part of the story, it makes it more inclusive. It makes me, it's not my history to tell, it's their story to tell, and it's me to help interpret or maybe take care of it at the park. So I think it just allows us to be more inclusive, and that's the goal. That's totally the goal in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I just finished teaching immigration history this semester, and I have my students read an article. It's called Symbolic Annihilation. And the whole article is about South Asian community on the West Coast going into lots of historical exhibits and exhibitions and things and never seeing themselves. And then sort of scholars looking at all that, taking in that experience and saying, basically, we're annihilated, we're missing. And sort of analyzing what that does to a community when you don't see your story. And so my students are always moved by the article because it's sort of something that we think about, but seeing the terminology, symbolic annihilation, it just...
Yeah, get me.
Yeah, no, it's in, and I mean, the scholars write it in that very purposeful way. And so when we read it then, I talked with them about this process and said, here's parallel to this, here's an example of people thinking because the gist of the article is you have to be very purposeful in your collecting and the questions that you ask, and you have to also be very purposeful in understanding what you don't know. Historians tend to always lead with what they know and never sort of ask, like, what don't I know? And how do I find what I don't know, right? We're much more comfortable talking about what we know about than walking out on an edge, right? Because we don't know what's down there. And again, this article challenges historians to say, it's as important as it is for you to know what you know, you also have to, as you describe it, sort of say, okay, well, we don't know this story. It's okay to say we don't know this story. Why should we?
Right.
It would be worse to pretend that we did.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think that edge, it was a scary place to be for the park, right? We're the Park Service, like, we know. But we were like, no, we don't know what we don't know. And we've told some of these stories before that are present in the exhibit, but we just stood on that edge and we said, okay, let's jump. And our community is the parachute. They're going to buoy it up. And I think that it also allowed us, I think part of that edge and that scariness is like there are hard stories there. And what we heard when talking with various community members is we don't want to shy away from those hard stories.
Right.
It's really, and I mean, we're all big Lowell fans, right? Like big Lowell fans, we're here for it. But there's a lot of pain, there is a lot of challenge, there is a lot of just hard stuff going on in our city throughout history. So we also need to embrace that. We need to talk about that. And I think that was a risky place for the park to put itself, right? We're a government organization, but we wanted to tell those stories because our community wants us to tell those, help them tell their stories too. It's not just us telling the story.
Right.
I want to make that clear.
And I think this is such an important thing to be doing at a time where this has like been a common theme on a lot of our recent episodes where stories are being annihilated, right? And we're trying to make sure we're bringing these stories forward. And I feel like not only is it an important thing to do, but the way that it's been done, it's been so inclusive, so accessible, bringing every voice imaginable in Lowell that you could to the table for as long as you can keep them, and making sure that you have the opportunity to tell future stories. That, like, to me, that's just like kind of groundbreaking and revolutionary at a time where we're just seeing so many stories being like hidden and telling those hard stories. That's a crucial part of the whole puzzle.
And I think that we have a responsibility to do that for the community, but also we are the National Park Service. These hard stories are not just happening here in Lowell.
Right.
And I think that we can be that representation for other people to then go back and look at their own communities or to look at other places around the country or the world and to say, oh, this is a problem everywhere, right? Like violence against women is a problem everywhere. Racism is a problem everywhere. So I think we have a responsibility to do that. And I think that we jumped at it. We dove over the cliff. It was very scary, and at different points in time it has been challenging to make sure everybody across the whole organization was really committed to that, but really people stayed committed on the park side too, which I was very impressed with an organization where we've been here for 40 plus years, so it can be challenging to change, but we've been trying to change, and I think that's been good.
And I think you see that in a lot of different ways when there are people who have been in a space for a long time. This is the way that we've always done it. This is how we're going to keep doing it, and having pushback, right? But when the community is like, actually, no, we like where this is going and we want to be active in it, and to have such a great turnout.
Yes.
How many people were involved, would you say?
So in like the kind of core roundtable conversations over the course of the whole time, it's probably been about 25 people that have come and gone, but 25 people. But then we also had a lot of public meetings outside of that were helped, different people in the community roundtable helped us facilitate or have access to different groups or organizations. So I really don't even know how many people participated in those. We also had some public online meetings, so it's a couple hundred people have been talked to. And then if you add on to the objects that they're in the exhibit, it was friends of people in the roundtable who said, oh, this is an object that should be included. So then you add that, it's probably another few dozen people there. So it's at least a few hundred.
Singing, you have people
we have people
dancing.
singing, we have people dancing, you add on that. I don't even know.
You have
We're starting to work
voices-
on the
you have
acknowledgement.
voices at the kitchen table.
It's true. We have
Lots
the
of
acknowledgement
stuff,
panel
right?
in process right now, and I think it's going to be a few hundred people.
That's
And we want to say the names too. I think that's very important. And I think, when I started, I hadn't thought about that. It's a lot of people.
Well, it's important.
It
It's
is.
important for people to know how much buy-in came from the community, and how those folks who were at the initial roundtables served as ambassadors to the
Yes.
community, and they took that responsibility seriously.
Very seriously.
And there are ways to go about getting feedback from your community that work.
Yep. And I will say it was a huge lift and totally worthwhile, but I think when we started on the process, we thought, oh yeah, we'll just talk with people, it'll be easy. But then talking to people is easy. Trying to figure out how to pull all those conversations into a physical space
Right.
when we had to actually curate, you do have to do a curation process.
Of course.
And so that was, taking 300 plus comments on one exhibit scene to figure out the direction to tell our designers was a lot. But the commitment from park leadership all the way through to frontline rangers was, nope, we are listening and this is what we're prioritizing. And so if we had that as our North Star, we were able to make those decisions. Because just as part of this process, because it is the national park exhibit, we did have to say, at the end of the day, we own this.
Right.
But we kept the community input as the North Star. And I think everybody did that. The
I mean, we
superintendent
even
did it,
spent
everybody.
a long time at one point talking about what the floor would look like.
Yes, we did.
Right, I just remember a bunch of
floor.
meetings on Zoom where there were different floor designs.
Yep.
With the river on, river on the floor. Or
River out here.
Yep.
Well, that was the example that I always give to people. I know it's silly, but the carpet. But we're talking. It was probably 6 to 9 months into it was more than that. It was maybe a year and a half into the project. And somebody in the community roundtable says the river, and we're like, we're talking about people, culture, immigration. The river? This is not a canal boat tour. What do you mean the river? And they said, well, the river is the reason why people have been here for 12,000 years. And that's the reason why the mills came. It's the reason why people are here. So the river is part of the cultural story of Lowell. And we were like, duh. And then I use that on my boat tour now all the time. But I was
The
like,
duh
duh,
or-
the river part. Yes, both. And we were like, we already are kind of not far in, but we were kind of into this design process, and we were like, it's only 1,300 square feet. How are we going to do another thing about the river? But our designers, who really listened and
Right.
came to all these community meetings too, our designer, Sam, said, hold on, I have an idea. And she put it as the carpet on the floor. So it guides people through the exhibit.
Oh my
And there's not a ton of interpretation with it, but just that idea, it's alluded to in other places, but just that idea that it guides people through as it's guided people to Lowell for 12,000 years, that was like community input, the park going, wah, the designer saying, let's find a way, and then it all came together.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
I just remember that moment where it was like, oh, the river,
The river.
right?
Yep.
And yet again, I go over it every day to get to work.
Yep.
But wait, and I mean, I do think that what this does, because the last meeting we started talking a bit about programming.
Yes.
Once the space is open, and I think the ability with everything that's new and exciting in there, there'll be the ability to have some pretty frank community conversations about sort of where we're at these days with the immigration debate in the United States with trying to come up with some better policy, with just all sorts of recognitions of how stories are similar but as well then distinct. And the excitement, hopefully, of the new space will lead to then more people wanting to come in, and there being more of an ability to have this, I don't want to call it a healing process, but more of an ability for people to listen.
Yes, an understanding process. I like listening process, and I think that is kind of the next, we've always said this was the start of something for the park. And I feel like it's going to be a big culminating 5 years, but it's the start of something. And it is the start of more listening in the form of bringing people together to have conversations. And we can use our historic, you do this on the show all the time, right? We use our historic lenses to understand our present. And I think in particular, immigration history, the housing crisis in the city. I'm just thinking about other pieces, just how do certain people have their culture celebrated, and how are other people oppressed still in the city today or around the world today. I think all of those are going to be really worthwhile conversations. We also hope that we can do some celebratory things, right? Like, let's activate Boarding House Park and have more of those dance. We have a whole dance component, which is one of my favorite pieces. But dance and music, food and culture, not just at the folk festival, but all the time too.
Oh, all the time.
I'm here for all the time. Yeah. I'm always the SEN, so. But both. And it's not just two things. That is the whole ecosystem of cultural expression and interesting things going on in the city. So.
I love the point you made about using a historical lens to have important conversations, and I really hope that this exhibit is used in that way. Like, I can already imagine like bringing some youth in there, I do some other side gigs where I get to teach Lowell's industrial history, thanks to Bob, really, to other people outside of Lowell. And like, I'm like, oh, how can I incorporate this exhibit now into those things? And how can I bring more people here? How can I bring people of all ages? And it seems like it's going to be one of those things that will not only be a draw for the regular tourists, but like more people getting excited about the things that we're already excited about.
Yeah, and I do think, we're going to have our national audience. We're a National Park Service site, cool. But I really hope that we do have more people from kind of the Merrimack Valley and the greater Boston area, because it is so representative of a lot of communities around here. So that is the kind of local families is really what we're hoping. And families being very intergenerational. Yeah. That's the other piece for me. The intergenerational thread that came up in conversations, that was huge. So we had to make this exhibit work for everybody from this big to this big and all the way in between. So I hope you bring your youth groups. I hope we bring our school groups. I hope we bring our families in.
I'll bring the second graders.
Please, they're my favorite.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I know. And we do have, our education programs through the Songus Industrial History Center. They already have some pre-existing ones that we know it will stitch really well with their themes, but we hope it springboards new ones. What are the other standards or curriculum challenges that we can help teachers and students meet across K to college? Hopefully this exhibit can do that too.
Oh, it absolutely will. I have no doubt about it. Emily, will you remind the people when it's opening one more time?
So it is opening September 2023. September 23rd is the tentative date right now. Pretty sure, 98% sure. So September 23rd, please put it in your calendars. It'll be an all-day event. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for all of the work that has gone, I know you're just one person.
Just one person of many. I represent a whole team. But the team is not just the park. The team was the community.
Yes. And also, thank you specifically, because I feel like it's important to have people like you on these kinds of projects to make sure that you have that North Star, to make sure that you're doing this with integrity. So I appreciate you, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So check out that exhibit, September 23rd, 2023. Thank you for tuning in. This has been History in Lowell.